Yo, what's up guys? Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to hit rank 3 with on the arena ladder. As you can see from the screenshot here, I'm currently 49-10 with this list, including a 20-2 run since I moved up to 4 Surgical Metamorph in the main deck, which I think was a really big upgrade for the deck, so this particular list has been performing incredibly well for me so far. And there's also only one day left on the rank ladder, so that explains why it's so hard at the top, but I'm definitely going to be grinding as much as I can to try and get that rank 1 finish if possible, and that'll be my 5th rank 1 finish of the year if I can get it, so I'm definitely going to be grinding a lot for this last day. But anyway, there's going to be a link down in the description with the importable deck list if you want to try it out for yourself. And I'm also in the middle of writing an article for this deck for MTGAzone Premium that'll be up next week at some point, that'll have more details, a full sideboard guide, how I change the deck for best of 1, and some tips and tricks to help you play the deck as well. So as soon as that's finished and up, I'll link that down in the description as well. But anyway, with that all out the way, this is my Quintorius control combo deck in Historic. So if you've been following deck lists that are coming out over the past few weeks, I'm sure you'll have seen the Discover decks that have been doing really well in both Historic and Pioneer, you know, both in the Historic Qualifier and the Pioneer Challenges as well. And it's kind of unsurprising because one-card combos are just incredibly powerful. The fact that you can just win the game with virtually no setup whatsoever is incredibly powerful. Now, I think the big issue with those decks, though, is that, or the list that I've seen so far, are very focused on the combo. They're very glass cannon, which means that, you know, I think one of the big reasons they did so well in those events were just that people were unprepared for them. They didn't know how to play against them. They didn't have sideboard cards for them. Now the metagame has had time to adjust. I don't think those lists are as consistent anymore because they kind of fall apart to specific types of interactions. So my goal when I started working on this deck was to figure out a way to make the deck much more resilient if possible. Now I don't really think that's very possible with the Appraiser version of the deck. I think the Geological Appraiser versions are very difficult to give a plan B or make more resilient because the combo takes up the majority of the deck, right? Once you have the combo in the lands, you have maybe, you know, 6 or 7 flex slots in the deck, which just isn't enough to fit a viable plan B in the deck. However, the Quintorius combo, I do think there's a lot of room for improvement and adjustment and making the deck more resilient overall, because the actual combo itself, you know, Quintorius is just a reasonable card on its own anyway. It's a decent planeswalker, and then the combo only really involves 4 spark double and then 2 extra clones. You only really need 6 clone effects for the combo to work, so you have so much room in the rest of the deck to maneuver. And so my goal when, you know, trying to make the deck more resilient is to just make the deck less vulnerable to specific types of interaction like counter spells, discard spells, instant speed burn spells, which Quintorius and the Appraiser builds are quite vulnerable to normally anyway. Also make the deck less vulnerable to hate cards as well, you know, stuff like Damping Sphere and Pithing Needle and you know, Archon of Emeria and stuff like that, whilst also just giving the deck a plan B as well, so even if the opponent does board in a bunch of hate against you, you have other ways to win the game. And my first thought was, you know, we have so much room in this deck to fill that why not just make the deck an almost full control deck with a ton of interaction, because most of the Quintorius lists that I've seen in Pioneer run some interaction stuff like Leyline Binding that can deal with, you know, hate pieces, but they were also running stuff like Beanstalk Giant and Greater Tanuki as ramping into the combo, which doesn't really make too much sense to me, because I feel like the big advantage of playing Quintorius over the Appraiser builds is that you can run a bunch of interactions. So I thought, why not just run it as just a regular control deck that still has access to this one card combo off both Quintorius Canned and Trumpeting Carnosaur. So if you're not familiar with this combo, basically the way it works is this is a 1-card combo with Quintorius Canned. So once you have Quintorius Canned, you put it into play, and you -3 to discover 4. And if you look at the structure of the deck, the only 2 cards that you can hit off discover 4 are Spark Double and Surgical Metamorph. And the card that we're hoping to hit the most is Spark Double. So Spark Double is a clone that can copy Quintorius Canned and make a non-legendary copy, which is very important. So once we hit the Spark Double, because of the Quintorius passive, we drain the opponent for 2. And then when Spark Double enters the battlefield, it enters as a non-legendary copy of Quintorius, which we can then minus again to discover. And because it's non-legendary, we double up on the passive ability. So the next clone effect that we hit then drains the opponent for 4, and even if we hit a Surgical Metamorph, we can then use Metamorph to copy the non-legendary Quintorius Canned that we made a copy with Spark Double, and then we get another copy, and then we minus again, and then we drain the opponent for 6, and then we get another copy, and then we drain the opponent for 8. So we just drain the opponent out even if they're above 20 life, which is pretty sick. Now obviously if we hit Surgical Metamorph before the Spark Double, both copies are legendary, so you only get to keep one of them, but with 8 clone effects in the deck, you're almost guaranteed to be able to kill them. Now as I said, you don't need 8, you can work with 6. Obviously the 4 spark doubles are mandatory because you need to try and make that first non-legendary copy as consistently as possible. It's a bit annoying because spark double is pretty bad to draw, but the really nice thing about this combo is that basically all the other parts of the combo are really good to draw. And Surgical Metamorph itself, as I said, you only need to be running 2 copies of this if you want to have a complete minimum combo package, but Surgical Metamorph is actually a pretty decent card to draw, and as I played with the deck, I realised how important this card is because not only can Surgical Metamorph, help you combo off, it can also copy permanents on either side of the battlefield, including yours and your opponents, which is very useful in a lot of scenarios. But the most important thing to note with Metamorph is that you can use it to copy lands, which is incredibly strong, especially on the draw, because when you're going second, Surgical Metamorph only costs 3 mana. So on turn 3, you can cast the Metamorph and then copy a land to use this essentially as a ramp spell in order to accelerate into Quintorius Can. So as I mentioned, I'm really not a big fan of dedicated ramp in this sort of deck because I feel like the advantage of playing Quintorius is that you can run more like a control deck and have a lot of interaction, but Surgical Metamorph still allows you to have acceleration into your combo whilst also, being a combo piece itself and also being very flexible because it can copy stuff like any big creature the opponent has in play. It can copy stuff like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, to tuck your opponent's Teferi. You can also use it to copy your own leyline bindings, which come up, that's come up a ton for me in testing as well, whilst also ramping into your combo as well. So this is such a flexible card as part of the combo piece, and is actually pretty good to draw as well. Even when you're on the play and it's 4 mana, you can still use it to ramp into Trumpeting Carnosaur, which is another combo piece as well, right? On turn 4, use it to copy a land and then cast Carnosaur on turn 5. Speaking of which, Trumpeting Carnosaur is another way to just combo off out of nowhere. So we have 8 1-card combos in the deck, which is so strong. So Trumpeting Carnosaur can be used as interaction, right? 3 mana channel to deal 3 to a creature or planeswalker is very nice as just giving you additional interaction in the deck. But when you cast it, it has Discover 5, so you can either discover into Quintorius straight away, which then enables you to combo off like I just mentioned. And if you don't hit Quintorius, you either hit Spark Double or a Metamorph, which you can then use to make a copy of Trumpeting Carnosaur and then go again. So again, we have just 8 ways to go off out of nowhere, which is so powerful. Even if you have a completely empty board and a completely empty hand, if you just top deck one of these, you can just win out of nowhere as well. The other big advantage of running 4 copies of Metamorph, or I guess just running the 8 clone effects in general, is that it maximizes the chances of the combo killing the turn you go off. So when I was only running the 6 clone effects, I did have some issues where I would draw 2 Spark Doubles, for example, and then get unlucky hitting multiple Metamorphs before I found the first Spark Double, and I wasn't actually able to combo kill that turn, which is a pretty big issue. So running the 8 copies of clones just maximizes your chances of killing, even if you happen to draw a couple clones. And then by extension, it also maximizes the chances of Carnosaur being able to kill the turn it comes down, because even if you go Carnosaur and you hit a couple of clones before you find the Quintorius off the Discover, you then still have 6 clones left in the deck to be able to combo kill as well. So running the 8 clone effects really maximizes the chances of the combo being able to kill the turn you come down, which is a pretty big deal, especially in this list where we're running more of a control deck, so you are going to see more cards over the course of the game, and so you are more likely to draw stuff like Surgical Metamorph as well. Now, as I mentioned, I'm very high on running Quintorius alongside a bunch of interaction, kind of like a traditional control deck. However, the obvious restriction in this particular list because of the combo is that you can't run any cards in the deck that cost 5 or less, or I guess in the main deck you can't run anything that costs 4 or less because it interferes with the Quintorius combo. I also didn't want to run anything that costs 5 in the main deck because it then also interferes with Carnosaur being a combo enabler as well, and so you're very restricted in the in the mana value of interaction that you can run. Now, that's not really a big issue for a couple of these because I think Leyline Binding and Kaleem are both cards that a normal control deck would definitely want to be running anyway. These are both premium pieces of interaction that are very strong. However, past that, the other interaction that we have to run in the deck does start to drop off. I think stuff like Hornlock Whale is typically a lot worse than stuff like Get Lost or Soul Partition, for example, and then the counter spells that we have access to, like Mirror Shell Crab, are significantly worse than stuff like Archmage's Charm or Reprieve. However, the big difference between this deck and a regular control deck is we only need to use our interaction to survive until turn 5 or 6, or sometimes even turn 4 if we have a Metamorph. So we don't need the interaction to be as good. All we need it to do is just buy us time until turn 5 to where we can resolve a Quintorius, sometimes until turn 6 until we can resolve the Carnosaur, and then we just win on the spot. So even though certain types of the interaction in the deck are a bit weaker than the regular control interaction, we don't have to rely on drawing more interaction to protect a fairy to win the long game, we can just win immediately with our combo pieces. So the actual interaction itself doesn't need to be as powerful in order to enable this deck, if that makes sense. So next up, we'll have a look at the interactions, starting off here with Leyline Binding, which is, as I mentioned, a premium piece of interaction that basically just deals with any problematic permanent. Very good in the early game at dealing with any creatures the opponent has. You know, we can very consistently cast this on turn 2 or 3 because of the mana base in this deck as well. And not only can it deal with creatures, it can deal with any permanent types whatsoever. Creature lands is its only real weak spot, but the main thing that this can also shut off is opposing hate pieces. So, for example, Pithing Needle and Damping Sphere are 2 cards that the opponent is likely to be bringing in against you. Roiling Vortex as well is another card that's good against you. And Leyline Binding can deal with any problematic hate piece the opponent can have to then unlock the combo to be able to go off as well. So Leyline Binding, very, very key part of the deck. Then we've got Hornlocked Whale, which, as I mentioned, isn't quite as efficient as cards like Get Lost that conventional control will be running, but it's still pretty good against early creatures, right? Especially against a deck like Is It Wizards. You know, the fact that we can just deal with any attacking creature is very good at slowing their damage down. And as I mentioned, the whole idea with this particular deck is we're just interacting in the early turns to buy us time until turn 5 or 6 to be able to combo off, or turn 4 if we have a Metamorph and we're on the draw as well. But like I said, Hornlocked Whale, very good in the early game at helping us stabilize to get to the combo. And then it also doubles up as an additional threat, which is very important. I think one of the big advantages of this particular list over the more all-in versions is we have a ton of other ways to close the game out. We've got Shark Typhoon, we've got Whale, we've got Kaleem, Oliphant, Carnosaur, Mirex, Karuga. So even if the opponent does land a hate card and we don't have a Leyline Binding to be able to answer it, or we want to use Leyline Binding on something else, we have a number of other ways to close the game out, including the Hornlocked Whale. And the other nice thing about this is it has Flash as well, so this is probably weakest against control because the Lagoon Breach isn't going to be very relevant against them. But once we hit turn 6, we can flash this in as a 6/6 Ward 2, and if they don't counter it, that's really difficult for them to remove. If they do use a counter spell during their end step, that often then allows us to go for the combo the following turn as well. So Hornlocked Whale, good against creatures in the early game, and then doubles up as an additional threat to close games out as well, which is pretty nice. Same sort of thing with Kaleem as well, you know, very good in the early game at slowing the opponent down. Also keeps the cards flowing as well, which is very important. You know, another big reason why I like this particular version of the deck is we don't have to mulligan to the combo very aggressively, right? I think if you're running the more all-in Quintorius or Appraiser versions, you want to mulligan a little bit more aggressively to a fast combo start. In this particular version, since we're basically just running a conventional control deck, you don't need to do that. You can keep hands with just a bunch of interaction, and then you're going to be drawing cards off Kaleem and Shark Typhoon to help you find your combo off the top anyway, which is nice. And then mulliganing less aggressively also then makes you less vulnerable to stuff like discard spells and counter spells as well, so just makes the deck a little bit more resilient, which is nice. But this is very good at helping us stabilize in the early game, you know, to help us get to our combo, taps down the opponent's creatures, keeps the cards flowing, and then it's also good against the other end of the spectrum as well, you know, because this is very hard for opposing control decks to stop. I think Kaleem is one of the best tools that you have against control because you can hold mana up, cycle this away, and then once you hit the third one, you know, keeps the cards flowing. Once you hit the third one, you get a 5/6 Flying Ward 2, which is very difficult for them to stop. Since it's all activated abilities, the opponent can't stop it with conventional counter spells either. And then 5 power is very relevant because it just immediately puts the opponent on a 4-turn clock as well. So Kaleem, very, very important card in the deck as well. And then as I mentioned, we've also got Carnosaur, which doubles up as early interaction. Now, obviously 3 damage for 3 mana is very overcosted in Historic, but having it stapled onto a card that also doubles up as a 1-card combo is incredibly strong. And you know, another advantage like Kaleem is that it is an activated ability rather than a cast, so it can't be stopped by conventional counter spells either, which is very relevant when a lot of decks are likely to be bringing in stuff like Spell Pierce against you post sideboard, which is pretty big. So then in the flex slot, we have 2 copies of Shark Typhoon. So I was originally running Mirror Shell Crab in the main deck in this slot, but having played with this card a little bit more, I'm not really sure that I want this in the main deck because, first of all, I don't think counter spells in the main deck are that good against the format right now. The main 2 matchups where you want it are against Control, where I think Shark Typhoon is already good, and I actually prefer Shark Typhoon against Control in the main deck because one of the big weaknesses of Mirror Shell Crab is it gets a lot worse as the game goes on. Once the opponent has access to more mana, they can very easily pay the 3 on this, whereas Shark Typhoon is good no matter how much mana the opponent has, even as the game goes on. And then the other matchup where you might want this in the main deck is against other Discover decks like Quintorius or Appraiser, but I feel like we already have an edge in those mirror matches anyway because we have more interaction, right? We can use Kaleem to tap their treasures down even if we're on the draw. We have Leyline Binding and Carnosaur to kill their creatures in response to the Discover triggers, and so I didn't really feel like we needed the Mirror Shell Crab in the main deck to have an advantage game 1 against them. And then the other combo decks in the format right now that typically see a lot of play are all all creature-based combos like, Yorgmoth and Samwise and Kethis, a lot of which play Delighted Halfling, which can shut off the Mirror Shell Crab anyway. If non-creature combo like Creativity or Charbelcher become more popular, then I could definitely see moving Mirror Shell Crab to the main deck, but as things stand, I just typically prefer Shark Typhoon in the main deck because, one of the other big differences between this list and conventional control is we don't have that much card draw, right? We can't run Archmage's Charm, we can't run Memory Deluge because of the mana value restriction, and so I quite wanted just more ways to cycle, just a little bit more card draw, because I felt when I had Mirror Shell Crab in the main deck, I did end up with certain hands where I just had a bunch of interaction, and if the opponent can play through that and I don't have much card draw, you can sometimes not find your combo and then not be able to go off. So Shark Typhoon is really nice as just a generically good card across the board, keeps the cards flowing, provides you with another threat to attack. You never want to hardcast this because we don't really have that many non-creatures in the deck, but just being able to cycle this into a big shark is another way to close games out, and it's just a generically good card. Also very good against control, as I mentioned, and we've got a couple more in the sideboard because of that as well. And then the last creature that we've got on the main deck is Oliphant, which is basically just here as additional lands. So if we look at the mana base here, we've got 26 lands plus 4 Oliphant, so 30 lands in total essentially, which might look like a lot, but as I mentioned, we don't have that much card draw, and so we need to manually just draw our 5th land drop on curve. And in order to consistently just draw your 5th land on curve, you need to have a very high land count. Some games we also need to find our 6th land on curve for the Carnosaur as well. Now we obviously do have the 4 Kaleem and the 2 Shark Typhoon to help us do that, but some draws we're not going to have that, so I think it's imperative to run 30 lands in this deck because you are just going to have some hands without any card draw with a bunch of early interaction and a Quintorius, and in those hands, which are pretty common, you just need to draw your 5th land on curve, so you need a very high land count in this deck in order to do that. And Oliphant is nice here. It kind of acts as a tap land, but it's actually better than a tap land in this deck because if you have a mana spare, which is especially common on turn 1, right? Because we don't have any turn 1 plays, so we can just play an untapped land on turn 1 and just use this to cycle, and then it's not a tap land anymore. So Oliphant, definitely better than tap lands, but the reason that I'm running it here, first of all, it's just good for mana fixing, right? If we happen to have a hand with just blue and red mana, we can use it to find the white mana to be able to cast our white spells, which is very important. But it's also very big as a leyline binding enabler as well. I felt like if you're just running triomes and shocklands, that's not going to consistently enable the leyline binding, and Oliphant is very good at enabling leyline binding early, right? If we have Hallowed Fountain on turn 1 into Oliphant, we can use it to find a Blood Crypt or a Stomping Ground in order to get leyline binding live on turn 2, which is a pretty big deal. It's just very good at finding our mana, very good at reducing this down to 1 mana so that we can have turns where we have, Kaleem or Hornlock Whale up, plus leyline binding is additional interaction. So very nice at enabling the leyline binding as well, which is very important. I think leyline binding is such a key part of this deck that we really want to enable it early on as well. And then it also doubles up as an additional threat. I have hardcast this a few times, so it does act as another way to close games out against grindy decks or in situations where the games go long. But it's mainly just here as a mana fixer and as a way to enable leyline binding. Then on top of that, we've also got Karuga as the companion, which is just very nice as an additional resource. Now we don't actually have that many permanents to trigger it. Leyline binding and Quintorius, if the opponent has shut off the combo, are the only main ways that we can actually draw off the Karuga, but leyline binding does come up pretty commonly, right? We are going to get this down in the early game, and we are going to copy it with Surgical Metamorph, so we do draw cards off it there, and just as an additional resource, it's nice. Then, as I mentioned in the mana base, we have 26 lands plus the 4 Oliphants, so 30 in total, which is very important, but we do have a number of utility lands. 4 Mirex is the main one here, because I feel like, Control was one of the worst matchups for these Discover decks. I think one of the main reasons I didn't want to run the more all-in glass cannon builds was just that they had an awful Control matchup, and I think this particular list actually has a very good Control matchup. I found Control to be a very decent matchup, and 4 Mirex is one of the big reasons for that. Having a Mirex early on is just really hard for them to play through. Unless they have Field of Ruin, it's very easy to just rack up the poison damage by just pumping a mana into Mirex every single turn. If they then tap out to deal with the Mirex tokens, that often then gives you a window to go off with Quintorius and Carnosaur. We have a ton of good tools in the Control matchup anyway. Kaleem is great, Shark Typhoon is great, Mirror Shell Crab is decent, and we've got more Shark Typhoons in the sideboard as well. So I feel like you can actually win the Control matchup very effectively, and Mirex is a really big part of that. Then outside of that, the rest is basically just all enablers for our to hit our colours. We've got Rafine's Tower and Sparrow's Headquarters, which are nice leyline binding enablers. Then we've got, obviously 4 of each of the Shocklands for our colours. And then we've got Blood Crypt and Stomping Ground to fetch off Oliphant. A basic mountain is also very relevant off Oliphant as well, because it's a land that we don't have to pay mana for to enter untapped. You know, there will be a lot of scenarios, especially against the fast aggro decks like Wizards, where you'll be at a low life total. Oftentimes they'll put you down to 2, and being able to cycle Oliphant to get a mountain in order to have an untapped land that doesn't cost you any life to pay, to then cast Quintorius on turn 5 to combo off, is very relevant as well. Then we've got 2 Seachrome Coast, which is just, you know, additional blue and white sources to hit that 18 to be able to cast Doomscar on turn 3. And then we've also got Castle Vantress, which I think is a very nice land in this deck as well. Helps us just dig for our combo as the game goes long. And then because of Oliphant, this is another reason we can get away with running Castle Vantress. Mana base, nothing too flashy, but the Mirex is so important at helping you win control matchups. And then the rest is basically just to help us find our colours and help us enable Leyline Binding. So that's the main deck overall. Like I said, I think this particular build really addresses most of the issues that I had with the Discover deck, in that it just makes the deck so much more resilient. We have a ton of other ways to close games out, so even if the opponent has hate pieces for our Quintorius or our Carnosaur, we can still close the game out. You know, we can copy stuff with Metamorph, we can win with the Whale, the Kaleem, the Typhoon. We have Leyline Binding to answer opposing hate pieces as well. We can just interact in the early game, you know, so it just feels like it fixes a bunch of the difficult matchups and issues that the more Glass Cannon builds had, if that makes sense. So next up we'll have a look at the sideboard, starting off here with 4 copies of Doomscar, which is really nice because it's a board sweeper that meets the mana value restriction of the deck. Now, obviously it being 5 does mean that it interferes with Carnosaur, but that's actually fine. You know, in the matchups where it's good, it's not actually that bad, because even if we cast Carnosaur and Discover into a Doomscar, sometimes that's going to be good enough to stabilize us anyway. And even if we go like Carnosaur into a couple of clone effects and then hit a Doomscar, we can just put it into our hand, so it's not the end of the world. So in the matchups where it's good, I don't mind it interfering with Carnosaur, and it doesn't stop the Quintorius combo, which is the most important part. But Doomscar, very good against any of the go wide creature decks like Humans and Merfolk, very good against the creature based combo decks like Samwise and Yawgmoth as well, and it's also incredibly important against the blue-white Scam Geist of St. Traff deck, because Doomscar is the only way that we beat that deck. So in that matchup, they're going to be hard mulliganing to Fragment Reality, and we're going to be hard mulliganing for Doomscar. So not the most fun matchup because of that, but Doomscar, even on the draw, if you play this on turn 3, it just wins you the game as long as they don't have Slip out the back. So that's basically how you win that matchup. The next time we've got 2 copies of Shark Typhoon, which is basically just here for the control matchup. You know, typically there I like bringing 2 more Shark Typhoon and the 4 Mirror Shell Crab. You can also just bring this in other matchups if you don't feel the main deck interaction is that good, but typically just a tool against control, because very good at, you know, we just hold mana open, can cycle this away and just, you know, start pressuring the opponent, which is very nice. And then that alongside Kaleem and Mirex and stuff like that makes it very difficult for the opponent to deal with our threats, because we're playing them all at instant speed during the opponent's end step. Then we got 4 copies of Virtue of Courage, which again is another card that does interfere with Carnosaur, but in the matchups where it's important, it's really important here. And the main reason why I really wanted to run this is specifically against the Geological Appraiser build, because going second against that deck, the only way in the main deck that we have of stopping them winning on turn 3 is with Kaleem, right? We can set a stop during their upkeep and then use Kaleem to tap down their treasure to stop them casting the Appraiser on turn 3. But post sideboard, especially going second, I really wanted another way to stop them comboing off, and Virtue of Courage is another way that we can do that, right? Even if we were on the draw and they go turn 3 Appraiser, we can just use the Virtue to kill their Appraiser and stop them comboing off. And then this is also useful in a couple of other matchups. I like bringing this in against Kethis as well, because we can use it to take out their early creatures like Delighted Halfling and Emry and Kinnan and stuff like that. And obviously any other matchup where the opponent has a lot of creatures that have 2 or less toughness that are important to kill, you can bring this in as an early interaction there as well, which is pretty nice. And then again, not too much of a big deal that it interferes with Carnosaur there, because early interaction is just very important in a number of matchups. And then we've also got the Mirror Shell Crab here, which, like I said, you know, it is important to have counterspells in the 75. And as I mentioned, if non-creature based combo like Creativity, for example, starts to become more popular, you could consider running this in the main deck. But this is definitely the best option that we've got for counterspells that can meet the mana value restriction that we've got going on in the deck. And the nice thing about this card, you know, the upside is it can counter abilities as well as spells themselves, which is pretty nice in certain spots. And it's also a channel ability itself, which means that it's very good at winning counterspell roars, right? If you're up against Control, for example, and they have 7 mana and they cast Teferi, even if they have Reprieve or Davin's Veto backup, they can't counter this, because it's an ability, it's an activated ability rather than a spell, which is pretty nice. But as I mentioned, the one big weakness of this card is the opponent can pay 3 as the game goes on, so it does lose its efficacy in longer games, if that makes sense. But it's still a really important card in particular matchups, like against Control and like against Discover combos, so it's definitely important to have in the 75. So that's the list overall. Like I said, I've been having a ton of fun with it. It feels incredibly strong, right? Having one card combos that can just win out of nowhere on a completely empty board is is so powerful, and so I'm really excited about this deck, and I'm definitely going to be playing it a lot going forwards. If you got any questions about the deck at all, definitely let me know in the comments. Next time, I've just got some gameplay that I was playing with this deck so you guys can see it in action. Just got 5 matches that I was playing on the ladder. Like I said, you got a question at all, give me a shout in the comments, and I hope you enjoy the gameplay. Big up. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this hand looks great, right? We're on the play. We've got Kaleem for turn 2. We've got Carnosaur as early interaction and Quintorius as well. So as long as we can find the 5th land, we've got a turn 5 win here. I'd imagine anyway. So Spark Double, like, worst draw in the deck. But, you know, against Wizards being on the play with Kaleem and double Carnosaur, I'm pretty optimistic about this game. So we can tap down the Soulscar Mage here. Obviously, you know, maybe it would be better to save it for a later turn. But I just want to keep the cards flowing. I don't want to miss land drops here. I think missing land drops would be the biggest issue here. So opponent does have the Arcanist here, so we're almost certainly going to use Carnosaur to kill the Arcanist, but I think I'm going to wait. There's nothing that can really stop the Carnosaur here, and there is a chance if they go Symmetry Sage, they might use their buff on the Arcanist instead, so I think I'm going to wait. They also might not have anything to flash back off the Arcanist. We'll see. If they probably do have a 1-mana spell here, yeah, so they go for Sleight of Hand. They also have the Balmor here, so I think we just have to target the Arcanist here. It is kind of tempting to go for the Balmor to reduce the damage a little bit, but we don't want to let them get the free value off the Sleight of Hand, so we'll take out the Arcanist this turn, and then next turn we've got a pretty sick setup as well. We can take out the Balmor, which we need to do during our main phase, because if we wait until their turn, they can cast an instant speed spell in response and buff the Soulscar Mage here. So hold on, just want to manually tap. I want to represent a non-Mirex land during the opponent's turn, so definitely need a Carnosaur now so they can't buff their other creature in response. And then we can just use Oliphant to find a basic mountain, so even if they deal us 14 damage this turn, we can still go for Quintorius next turn. So really hope they tap out here. Okay, sweet, they do. The one risk you need to be very wary of when you're playing against Wizards is burn spells, because Quintorius goes down to 1 loyalty when you minus him, and if they kill the Quintorius with a burn spell like a Wizard's Lightning or a Play with Fire in response, then they can fizzle your combo. Oh wow, we drew another clone. This is kind of why I like running 8 clones in the deck, because drawing 2 or 3 clones means you can still combo off. So ideally we hit a Spark Double here. Okay, perfect. Now I'm pretty sure we have a deterministic win with 6 clones left in the deck anyway, but now for sure we can combo off here. So we make a non-legendary copy, we discover. Hit Surgical Metamorph. Is very important that we copy the Spark Double non-legendary copy here, or we legend rule it and we don't get to keep all 3 copies. But now we can just -3 again, hit another Spark Double, which is sick. We drain them for 3, make another copy, and then discover again. One other thing is you need to be very wary of the number of clones that you have left in your deck, because there are some matchups where I board out a couple of Metamorph if I'm on the play, you know, specifically against decks like Control, for example. And I have had a few games where I just mindlessly -3 and discover. Sorry, I'm just going to sideboard quickly first. So yeah, we want the Doom Scars here, probably. I think Shark Typhoon is the weakest card, and then I'm not sure what we want to cut here. We are going second, so I do kind of want to keep the 4 Surgical Metamorphs in. I think I might just trim a Carnosaur and a Doom Scar, although, I don't know. Like, if we were on the play, I think I'd probably like trimming a Metamorph or 2, because, you know, obviously 4-mana Metamorph isn't very good against Wizards, but here I think I'm just going to trim 2 Carnosaurs, bring in Doom Scars. But yeah, sorry, the point I was trying to make there is always just manually check how many clones you got left in the deck, because I've had a few situations where I board out, or I happen to draw like 4 clone effects and I don't have the kill, and being able to just plus off Quintorius just to get a 3-2 into play and get close to the ultimate on the one that you've got left in play is so much better than obviously just using minus and hitting nothing. So always keep an eye on how many clones you got left in the deck, basically. So this hand doesn't have too much early interaction, right? We don't have anything until turn 3, but we can use the Surgical Metamorph to ramp. We also have the Carnosaurs as early interaction, and we have the Quintorius here straight away. So going to cycle the Oliphant here. I think I need to get a Steam Vents here so that Castle Vantress enters untapped, and we can play it tapped here without having to lose 2 life. So, you know, typically against a deck like Wizards, you want to fetch the basic mountain if you have your colours already, but since we have the Castle Vantress here, I think it is important to get a Steam Vents so that we can have that entering tapped. So, slightly slow start from the opponent, I'm very happy to see here. We could obviously use the Carnosaur on the Balmor, but with Balmor as their only creature, Balmor is typically a big threat once the opponent has a lot of creatures in play. So I'm actually just going to run out the Metamorph and clone these steam vents here. So now we represent Quintorius next turn. And this is pretty big because I think it will slow down the opponents, their ability to apply pressure here. Because if they have a Spell Pierce or a Wizard's Lightning, they have to keep mana open for it. So I'm not going to go for Quintorius here. They could very well have Spell Pierce. They could very well have a burn spell here as well. So I'm just going to play things a little bit slowly here. The opponent isn't really putting pressure on us, so we can just play this, slow control game. And this is why I like this particular build, because we can pivot into more of a traditional control style game plan, if that makes sense. We don't need to go too hard on the combo. We don't need to run it out and hope the opponent doesn't have any interaction. So here, I'm actually just going to run out the Carnosaur, because if they do have Spell Pierce, then it doesn't stop it. If they have a burn spell, then, they would need 2 Wizard's Lightnings, and they can't cast that right now. So yeah, Carnosaur should actually be pretty good here, right? We can hit clones to make multiple copies, and then, we've already got 15 power in play. Okay, we hit another clone. I actually think it's just better for us to hit a bunch of clones here, because I assume from how they've played that they have either a burn spell or a spell pierce for a Quintorius. We'll see if we do hit a Quintorius here. But yeah, we hit another clone. So I'm pretty happy about this. I don't think they have anything that can kill all of the Carnosaurs here. Obviously, the opponent did have kind of a slower start, but once we start representing Quintorius, they kind of have to play slower to keep their interaction up. Okay, so now we'll see if they have the spell pierce. Yeah, see, they were holding up the spell pierce, so that's kind of the threat of the combo is also a very real thing in matchups like this as well. So yeah, we should win here. Yeah, we got there. Nice. Okay, so we're going second here. And I can't keep this one, I don't think. Wow, okay, this is bad. I'm going to have to go down to 5, which is really rough. Okay, this is a reasonable 5, though. I think, the one big advantage of this particular list is that you can recover from mulligans if you just hit your 5th land and find the Quintorius, right? Okay, we are against Devotion, and there is the Quintorius. So, I mean, Devotion is usually a decent matchup because they don't really have great ways to stop your Quintorius. Wow, okay, Metamorph is a great draw because that can help us ramp. I was going to say, on the draw, on a Multi 5, we might be able to get raced if they have a fast start, but if we can keep finding land drops here, all we need at this point is one more land drop because we can use the Metamorph to copy one of our lands next turn. Okay, perfect. I mean, obviously the Spark Double was a bad draw there, but we can use the Metamorph to copy one of our lands. And now we should be good to win next turn, unless they have exactly... Okay, they got Nykthos, unless they have exactly Karn into Pithing Needle. So Storm the Festival is pretty scary, but even if they hit a Karn here, I don't think there's anything they can do to shut off the combo. So... Okay, so they time just went to get back the Storm the Festival. But yeah, we should just win here then. Hopefully we don't draw another Spark Double off the top. Okay, sweet. So now we should just be good to win. I think even if we get unlucky with the Quintorius hits, we still have 6 clones left in the deck. I mean, maybe if we hit all of the Metamorphs before we hit the first Spark Double, we might be in trouble, but I think that's pretty unlikely. Okay, sweet. Now we got the Spark Double. Now we should just be good to win, right? We can go copy, and now every single other clone that we get can make an additional copy. So yeah, if we'd drawn another Spark Double for the turn, and we'd got unlucky just hitting Metamorphs, I think there's a chance we don't win here straight away. But even then, I think, it's going to be hard for them to win the following turn, potentially. I mean, I guess they could find Karn and get Pithing Needle, although we already have the Leyline Binding. So even then, I think we're good to win. Because the other thing is, even if you fail with the combo, you still end the turn with, 4 Quintoriuses in play, which is pretty difficult to beat if you just keep ticking them up every single turn. So Devotion in general, I think, should be a pretty good matchup, though. I mean, obviously, if they have a fast start, they can get Karn down early. So I think we want the Mirror Shell Crabs here. Shark Typhoon, not great. Hornlock Whale, also not great. So I'm just trying to think which is the best out of these two to fill the last 2 slots. Honestly, I don't think we're ever worried about Devotion killing us via attacking, right? I think we're much more worried about them getting Karn down. So I think I prefer the Shark Typhoon here just as a way to... potentially cycle towards a Quintorius or a Carnosaur as a combo piece, if that makes sense. And then on the play, I think there's maybe a consideration to trimming a Metamorph, but... Okay, so this looks reasonable as a keep, I think. Nothing until turn 3 is a little bit sketch, particularly if they have a fast start. So I think this is a borderline keep, right? I'm mainly keeping this on the back of Quintorius here, to be honest. Because, you know, if they do get a very fast start here, if they go like Cura into, you know, some 2-drop or something, then it's going to be tricky. I feel, you know, just Halfling should maybe be okay. I'm worried if they go Khan here, though, because we don't have a way to stop that. Halfling also makes this Mirror Shell Crab pretty pointless against, well, pretty useless against Khan or Cura exactly. So just got to hope. Okay, they do have the Khan. So this game is going to be a little bit more difficult now. I mean, we'll see what they pick. Yeah, so they go for Pithing Needle. So now Quintorius is going to be shut off. So yeah, maybe this hand was a mulligan. I'm honestly not sure. I think on the play this hand is a definite keep because, you know, turn 3 is usually fast enough, but we'll have to see how this pans out. I think I'm definitely going to use the Carnosaur here to take the Khan out. We don't want to let them get a second activation off here. Oh, okay, yeah, going into maintenance, sure. So from this spot, I still feel okay, right? We can still find a Leyline Binding to shut off the Pithing Needle. Wow, they just attack with Lair of the Hydra. Okay, that's a very good sign. I mean, even if we don't find the Leyline Binding, I still think I like just getting to 6 mana hardcasting the Carnosaur, because obviously Carnosaur hitting Quintorius would kind of suck, but there's a good chance that we just go Carnosaur into a bunch of clone effects. Wow, they're just going for Lair. I wonder what they have in hand to want to attack with Lair. Maybe they just want to close the game out, but I feel like if they had anything else, if they had any creatures or Storm the Festival, they would just cast it. So I'm pretty confused about what the opponent's hand is here. So at this point, I'm just trying to debate whether I want to go Sacred Foundry tapped or an untapped land here. I think I'm just going to go tapped, attacking with the Murex token, and then just cast the Carnosaur next turn. If they cast something like a Storm the Festival, we still have the Mirror Shell Crab to counter it. Obviously, if they have a legendary spell, like a Pelucranos, they can give it uncounterable with the Halfling here. Okay, another Halfling. Maybe they just had a bunch of mana dorks and just want to apply pressure. So yeah, maybe they just kept a hand off the back of a fast Khan, which kind of makes sense, right? Sometimes Devotion has to keep hands, you know, fast Khan against a combo deck, because that's their only way of beating you. Oh wow, okay, Leyline Binding is interesting. I still think I'm just going to slam the Carnosaur here, though, because next turn we can potentially go Binding into Quintorius. And here, if we can just get a bunch of clones on the Carnosaur, that's going to be sick. Also, Carnosaur could very well hit another Quintorius, and getting a Quintorius in play off the Carnosaur. Yeah, here. So we obviously can't activate the Quintorius here, but we have the Leyline Binding in hand now, so we can just Binding the Pithing Needle next turn, and then just hopefully combo off with the Quintorius. So I think for the opponent to recover here, they would need, you know, a very explosive turn, maybe like a Storm the Festival into a, you know, Cavalier and a Khan, and then, you know, get another Nykthos or something like that. But I feel pretty good about this spot now. They basically need... Okay, they do have the Khan, but they basically need to kill us this turn. And the Carnosaurs are... You know, the trample is very relevant here. Wow, they go for Darksteel Citadel. That is kind of confusing. I wonder what they have in hand that they would need an extra land for. I mean, either way, I think I'm going to lead on cycling the Oliphant here just to reduce the cost of the Leyline Binding slightly, just in case they do have something here that's unexpected, because they have been playing a little bit weirdly. I don't know quite why they fetched the Darksteel Citadel there. Maybe they've brought in like Ugin or Ulamog or something. By the way, we get to resolve the Leyline Binding here. They could have another Boseiju, but I don't get why they would get Darksteel Citadel. Yeah, okay, opponent just scoops it up. So that's a pretty good matchup, but this should kind of highlight it. Devotion does definitely struggle against our strategy, unless they have a very fast start. Okay, so I'm going second here. And, I mean, I'm not thrilled to have a Spark Double in my opening hand, but Double Kaleem and Carnosaur is good against a number of decks, so I think I'm happy to keep this one. Obviously, not having white mana is a little bit sketchy as well, but we have, you know, 4 draws in the first few turns because of these Kaleems here, so... Interesting, Mardu into Bloodtithe Harvester, so that makes me think we're probably against Reanimator here if I had to guess, which... Not much have I faced so far, but I think it should be reasonable, right? You know, obviously them reanimating Atraxia is kind of scary, but... You know, they take a few turns to kill us, and... Okay, definitely against Reanimator after seeing the Scrapyard. But yeah, I feel it should be good because they don't really have good ways to stop the combo outside of Thoughtseize exactly. So again, we did find a white source, which is pretty nice. So I think I'm just going to pass the turn back here and probably going to use one of these Carnosaurs to take out the Crucius. You know, obviously could use the Kaleem to keep cycling here, but I think cutting off Crucius is very important because they have discarded Unburial Rites, namely Ambitious, so they almost certainly have an Atraxa in hand. Now they could obviously cycle the Atraxa away and reanimate it. Oh wow, they're missing land drops? Okay, they're missing land drops. If they had that land... Oh, they're running Carnosaur. Interesting. I actually tried... Like, Reanimator is one of the decks that I was going to cover on the channel. Still might post my build soon, actually. And I didn't really feel like Carnosaur was worth it in this particular build because it interferes with Crucius, it cuts you off Gigantha and stuff like that. But interesting to see the opponents running it here. So here I think I'm just going to pass back. I'm going to shock this Sacred Foundry in and then probably just going to Kaleem to tap down the Harvester and then use the Hornlocked Whale to put Crucius back on top of the deck. So they named Ambitious on the Carnosaur discard, I believe. So they do definitely have Atraxa in hand. Okay, Leyline Binding is a pretty nice draw here as an answer to Atraxa. So they can definitely now loot away the Atraxa with the Blood Token or the Scrapyard and then use Unburial Rites to reanimate it this turn, which is kind of scary. But, you know, we do have the Carnosaur in hand that I think I want to try and save. Wow, they're not going for the reanimation. Surely they must have Atraxa in hand here, right? But either way, I think I'm just going to, you know, try and conserve as much life as possible. Probably going to save the Leyline Binding for Atraxa. They have to discard it off the looting of Fable here, right? And then they can use Unburial Rites to get it back. So the risk here is that, yeah, there is the Atraxa. The risk here, though, is that they hit Thoughtseize off the Atraxa trigger, which is kind of rough. Just debating whether I want a Binding now. I think I probably have to save the Binding for the Atraxa because the risk of using Binding here is they're definitely going to reanimate the Atraxa. And if I don't use... Sorry, if they hit Thoughtseize to take away the Carnosaur, then I don't have a way to deal with the Atraxa anymore. And they obviously could be running Fragment Reality as an answer to Leyline Binding, but if they hit Surgical Metamorph off the Fragment Reality trigger, then we can copy their Atraxa, which is pretty sick. So here I'm going to use the Binding before the trigger in case they're running Reprieve. You know, I saw, you know, Mistman was running Reprieve in the main deck, so I want to play around that. Oh, yikes. They do hit a Thoughtseize, so that's pretty rough. Now they can Thoughtseize away the Carnosaur, and then we're left at the mercy of the top of our deck, which is a bit rough. But again, you know, if we hit another Carnosaur or a Quintorius, we can just win on the spot. So yeah, they take the Carnosaur, makes a lot of sense. But at least the Atraxa's off the board now, and you know we can always just play the Hornlocked Whale as a 6/6 blocker. That's going to be tricky for them to deal with. I don't know how many ways they've got of dealing with that in their main deck. So they use up all their treasures to cast Crucius and then Ambitious. Okay, so not the best spot here, but I think I can at least run out the Hornlocked Whale here, and you know I think it's unlikely they have a way to kill this. Obviously they could have Fragment Reality, but they still have to pay the ward too. They could also potentially have Shieldred's Edict because of the scam deck. I think it would be reasonable to have Edict in the main, but you know I think it's much more likely that they have Fatal Push. You know, I assume that'll be the first 4 copies of Interaction that they're running, which means they can't really deal with the Hornlocked Whale. And if they don't have a way to kill it, I think there's a reasonable chance they don't attack with the Crucius here because they only have 5 damage on board. Okay, now with the Priest of Fell Rites, they can unearth that as an extra 2 points of damage here, but that's still not lethal, right? Yeah, okay, so they use the Priest of Fell Rites. They do get back Carnosaur, so we need to draw something pretty good pretty quickly. But I mean, again, one of the big advantages of this deck is we do have, you know, 4 Carnosaur, 4 Quinn. We know the top card's Kaleem, though, so we'd need to go Kaleem into Quintorius in order to stabilize here, I think. Okay, they choose not to attack with Crucius, so kind of predicted that. It is a risky attack for them to make if it doesn't kill me. So I think our only out here is Kaleem cycle into Quintorius here. If not, there's just no way that we can win this, I don't think. So I just want to manually tap so we don't cut ourselves off that, because the auto tapper doesn't account for potential top decks, obviously. But yeah, if we don't hit that, I think we just go to game 2. But that Thoughtseize was the big, you know, turning point in this deck. Oh my god, okay. Sick. I mean, to be fair, this does kind of highlight the real strength of running 1-card combos, because you can be super behind with nothing going on in your hand and then literally just win out of nowhere. And I think we should have enough clone effects to definitely win here, especially when they're on 13, even if we hit all the surgicals first. I mean, they could have was going to say they could have edicts potentially. They could also use Fragment Reality on this copy of Quintorius, I believe, because one change with the surgical extraction is it does enter as an artifact copy, which has come up a couple of times where the opponent has used like Haywire Might to exile it in response to the Discover trigger, but I think we should just be good to win here. If the opponent had a piece of interaction, they would have used it already, so obviously that was very fortunate of us there, but it was also kind of fortunate for the opponent to hit a Thoughtseize on the Attract. So if they didn't hit exactly Thoughtseize or Reprieve there, I think we probably win a few turns ago, so... But yeah, either way, I think, you know, this should just highlight how powerful one-card combos are, that you can be dead on board with basically no way to win, and then just one card can just win you the game out of nowhere, right? Yeah, opponent just scoops it up. So I do feel like this matchup should be pretty reasonable, though, right? Mid-range typically does struggle against combo decks like this, especially ones where you can just rip it off the top and win out of nowhere. I think I'm just going to resubmit. Honestly, mid-range has felt pretty good as just the main deck configuration is set up. Obviously, the big difference with their deck is that they have a much stronger late game. They can close games out a lot quicker. They can refuel a lot quicker. And if they do board into Reprieve, that can be a bit of an issue as well. But I have felt like, you know, every time I've faced these red-black core mid-range decks, the matchup has felt very solid from our side. Even though we are solid, that, you know, Control does sometimes struggle against mid-range because of the discard spells, but with 8 cards that we can just draw off the top and just win the game instantly, it's very difficult for them to beat that. Now, typically I hate mulliganing against Thoughtseize decks, but we can't keep that one. Okay, this we definitely can keep, and I think I'm going to put back a Carnosaur here. Right, we do want early interaction. Hornlock's well is good at that. If they do have Thoughtseize, they can only take away one of these. Okay, they do lead on a Thoughtseize. Presumably they take the Quintorius here, unless they have a second one. The other nice thing about this hand is we also have turn 2 Leyline Binding available here because we have Rafine's Tower into Steam Vents. Wow, they take the Leyline Binding, so they either have a very fast Reanimation start here, or they have a second Thoughtseize, I imagine. Okay, so they run out the Blood-Tithe Harvester. Oh, okay, Surgical Metamorph is very nice here because we can then ramp, you know, we can use it to copy a land. So I'm definitely just going to fire off the Hornlocked Whale. We, you know, the name of the game here is just stabilizing, just buying ourselves time, you know, assuming we hit lands. This kind of highlights as well, hopefully, why is very, very important to have a high land count because we just need to keep drawing lands here and we win. If you're not running 30 lands, you're going to end up in spots like this where you just don't draw your lands and, you know, you just don't win on turn 5, which is a huge difference. So I was almost certain to use the Metamorph here, but I think with Priest of Far Rights in play, we have to hold up the Carnosaur just in case they do loot away Attracts like they did here. So instead we use the Carnosaur here. Really hope we hit a 4th land off the top. You know, again, this should just highlight why I'm running 30 lands for exact spots like this where if you miss land drops, you go from just winning the game on turn 5 to giving the opponent a ton of extra time, which is obviously very bad. Okay, so they have the Fable here, which is fine. Not too worried about that. Okay, there is Pithing Needle. So they presumably named the Quintorius here, which is a bit annoying. We do find a land, though. So, I'm kind of tempted to use the Metamorph to copy the Fable here, because then we can... Or I can use it to copy the land and ramp into the Carnosaur. I think I'm going to do that because the issue with copying Fable, even though it does give you looting and potential treasure generation, is when you hit Chapter 3, the Metamorph just exiles itself and doesn't come back as Reflection. You don't actually get Reflection. So I think I prefer copying a land. Although having said that, they can... Actually, that was probably a big punt on my part, right? Because now they can reanimate Atraxa, and I could have saved the Metamorph to copy the Atraxa. So yeah, that was almost certainly a punt on my part. I just played it a little bit too quickly there, I think. I think it's almost certainly better to save the Metamorph. Although having said that, if we draw a land off the top, we can just potentially win here. Yikes. Okay, so we didn't hit a land. So yeah, I think it was probably just better to save the Metamorph, because then we can copy a Traxxer and we're guaranteed to find a land off that, presumably. Here, I think I'm just going to cycle the Typhoon for 1. Okay, we did find a land, and I'm very glad I did that main phase, because it was a Seachrome Coast. So now we at least have a blocker for a Traxxer, and now next turn we can go Carnosaur and, you know, hopefully hit a bunch of clone effects. If we do just go straight into Quintorius, that's going to be a bit rough, but... So yeah, I think I definitely did misplay. I should have saved the Metamorph to copy the Atraxa there. I just, you know, played a little bit too quickly, I think. Oh, wow. Okay, Leyline Binding's pretty sick here. So I'm going to go Carnosaur, and even if we do hit Quintorius, I don't think it's too bad, because I think Okay, yeah. I mean, I would have preferred to hit a few clones just to get some more bodies in play to block with, but I think this is fine because at 14, I assume, like, from my opponent's perspective, it is probably almost certainly going to be the correct play for them to just attack me with the Atraxa rather than attacking down the Quintorius, right? Because we're on 2-turn clock. And if they don't attack down the Quintorius, we can just use the binding on the Pithing Needle and then combo off next turn. So I think unless the opponent has a removal spell for the Carnosaur, I think they're very likely to just attack me here with the Atraxa. Yeah, sweet. So the Quintorius survives here. And now even if we don't draw a land off the top, we can go binding and activate Quintorius. Obviously, if we do find a land off the top, even if they'd attack Quintorius, we can binding the Pithing Needle and then cast a second one anyway. Okay, Spark Double off the top isn't what we want to see because obviously we need that to be able to combo off. And, I mean, even if they have Reprieve here, that doesn't get the job done, right? Because they Reprieve the binding, we can just recast it. So, they are at 28, though, and drawing that Spark Double off the top does have me worried that I won't be able to hit enough clones to kill them. But we can obviously cast the Spark Double here as well, which should help mitigate that somewhat. So, hopefully we have enough clones here to kill them. I mean, typically you do, right? This is one of the other reasons why I like running the 4 Metamorph. In addition to it just, you know, being really flexible and useful as a ramp tool, is that, you know, even if the opponent's above 20, you can usually win. Oh wow, opponent just scoops it up. But yeah, that felt pretty good. Okay, so we're going second here. And yeah, I think this sounds reasonable to keep, right? Obviously, having a Spark Double and having no actual white mana is a little bit sketchy, but against a Yorion deck, I think I'm happy to keep this one. Oh, whoops, I didn't mean to shock the land in there. That was a misclick, my bad. But yeah, Yorion is almost certainly either going to be control or gates. And from what we've seen so far, I think almost certainly is going to be against control, and double Kaleem in your opener is very solid against control, so really got to hope that I hit some lands here though. If I miss land drops, that's going to be rough, but in a 30 land deck with 2 Kaleem triggers here, I think we should be good. And yeah, like I said, getting double Kaleem in your opening hand is very solid against control because, you know, getting an early Kaleem on the battlefield is going to be really tricky for them to deal with, especially if we get it in play around our turn 5 or so, because the opponent is often forced to tap out to deal with it, which then hopefully clears the way for us to combo off with Quintorius. Oh my god, are you serious? We hit. Not only did we miss a land, but we also hit the worst possible draw in Spark Double here. Okay, we hit another land. That's. I mean, not great to have to tap out, but at least we found the land there. This is kind of why it's very important to run a high land count in this deck. Yikes. Okay, so we have to cast the Metamorph here to try and copy a land. At least if this resolves, we can copy an opponent's Hallowed Fountain. And a lot of people probably don't realize this can copy lands, so the opponent might just think I'm misplaying here. Or they don't want to just waste a counterspell on this. Okay, they let it resolve, which is a big deal. At least we don't miss the land drop for this turn. But again, having to tap out going into their turn 5 when they could have Teferi, especially when they've got Memory Deluge here, it is very sketchy. So, you know, this kind of highlights why you need to run a very high land count in this sort of deck, because missing land drops, especially against control like this, is an absolute nightmare. I mean, having said that, we don't have that many good cards to play at instant speed hit anyway. Okay, at least we hit the third Kaleem so we can get a threat in play, but missing lands again is kind of sketch, and we have to discard to hand size here. So this hopefully shows why I really don't recommend cutting lands from the deck. You need to run a high land count, because even, right, this hand had double Kaleeman as well, so we still had card draw, but you need to be curving out until your 5th land in basically every matchup, especially against control. So we are pretty far behind here, but thankfully the opponent didn't have Teferi last turn, and we should be able to get Kaleem into play here unless they have something weird, right? If they're playing Lotus Field, maybe they have like a discontinuity or something, but if not, we do get to get the Kaleem into play, which is something, right? And we get to dig towards more lands. Okay, we do find the 5th land, thankfully, but it is a tap land, which is a little bit annoying. By the way, we do get to get Kaleem into play, which is very good in this matchup, so, you know, there's a chance we might just be able to ride this Kaleem to victory. We'll have to see. So we'll attack here. And we do also have the Mirrex now, and Mirrex is online. We can start activating that. Although having said that, I do still think it's important to keep hitting land drops, so I might still just cycle the Kaleem instead here to try and hit more lands. We'll have to see what the opponent does first, I think. Okay, so they do have Supreme Verdict, which makes me more inclined to go for Kaleem here, because That does put the Kaleem into the graveyard, which then fuels more Kaleem triggers. You know, we only have one more Kaleem to find until we can get another one on the battlefield. So I think instead of activating the Mirrex, even though it's less mana efficient, I'm going to go for the Kaleem here just to try and keep the lands flowing. Okay, another Spark Double. So we're drawing kind of worst possible so far, but thankfully the opponent doesn't have like a very strong proactive hand. And I'm kind of getting worried now that when we do cast Quintorius, we might just not have enough clones left in the deck, because we've drawn 3 Spark Doubles now, which is a bit sketchy. But we should also be able to get another Kaleem into play here, which is, you know, definitely powerful. And we do get, you know, we do get more draws. There are more Kaleems in the deck, so there's a chance we could just ride Kaleem to victory. We don't even need the Quintorius this matchup. And the other thing is, even if we do miss clones in the deck, we can always just use Quintorius to plus. And Quintorius plussing against control is very scary from their perspective. So we did hit another land, and we've got Oliphant here as well, which is pretty sweet. So we get him for 5, they're down to 10, and we still have Mirrex. So thankfully, because the opponent didn't happen to have the Teferi on turn 5, we might actually be able to win this, even though we drew, you know, missed land drops and drew a bunch of Spark Doubles here. I mean, we'll obviously have to see how it plays out. The other thing is, Kaleem getting in for a few attacks means that we probably don't need as many Spark Doubles in order to win with Quintorius anyway, right? I mean, we've used up one of our surgical metamorphs as well, but, you know, if the opponent's at 10, we don't actually need that many triggers of the passive to be able to kill the opponent. So I'm just trying to think, the opponent must just have a bunch of counter spells in hand, right? They haven't really done too much. Okay, they do have Farewell. We also can just start casting the Hornlocked Whales here as well. And if they use their counter spell on the Hornlocked Whale here, if they have like a reprieve or something, we can then just resolve the Quintorius next turn. So, you know, this is, you know, even though we did draw pretty badly, we can just beat control because we have so many threats that we can use at instant speed, like the Mirrex, like the Kaleem, like the Hornlocked Whale as well. So definitely going to use the Oliphant here just to keep hitting land drops. Going to fetch a Blood Crypt here so that if we draw a Leyline Binding, it'll cost 1 mana. And, you know, life total is not super relevant in this matchup, so I think we can afford to put it into play untapped. And now we have the option of using Kaleem and Mirrex, or potentially Hornlocked Whale as well. I think that's probably the best option that we've got here. And now we're still in a really good spot where if they do tap out to deal with the Hornlocked Whale or they counter it, that could potentially give us a window to just resolve the Quintorius. And at 4 life, you know, we only need 2 clone effects, even if we hit double Metamorph, to be able to kill them. So they do finally find a Teferi, but I think it might just be too late for the opponent here, because I'm definitely going to go for the Hornlocked Whale during the end step here. And if they happen to use a counterspell to stop it, that really restricts the mana they have available going into this turn. They need to deal with both the Hornlocked Whales here, and the one in play already has Ward 2. So they do have access to 7 mana off the Teferi untap here, which is definitely enough to counter the Hornlocked Whale and deal with the other one. I mean, there's no... Well, I'm not going to play around Settle the Wreckage here, right? If they have Settle, then good beats. But I think we should be good to win here, right? They would need, you know, 2 removal spells, and it would almost certainly, even if they have 2 Fragment Realities, it would almost certainly just tap them out of counter spells. And if one of these Fragment Realities, if they do have that, hits a Surgical Metamorph, we can also copy their Teferi. So I feel pretty good about this spot, right? I think they would need... Okay, there is 1 removal spell, but it's Get Lost, so they only have access to 3 mana here. So they need Fragment Reality to survive here. And even then, we not only... Well, even then, we just get to resolve the Quintorius. Okay, looks like they do... Okay, they do have Fragment Reality, but they completely tap out, so we just win off Quintorius here. So hopefully we hit a Metamorph. Okay, we do hit a Metamorph, which is nice. But I'm not going to plus the Teferi because I don't want to draw another clone. I want to, you know, keep the clones in the deck to be able to win off Quintorius. I haven't counted up how many clones we've used yet, but if we happen to plus Teferi and hit 1, that would be kind of rough. So we do hit Metamorph. We definitely have at least 1 clone left in the deck, so we should just be good to win here regardless. But yeah, that's kind of a crazy game to win where we missed an absolute ton of land drops and we drew 3 Spark Doubles and a Metamorph as well. So yeah, managed to get there. That felt pretty good. So control here, I'm definitely going to be bringing in the Shark Typhoons and the Mirror Shell Crabs, and then probably just going to be trimming... I'm not sure whether Hornlocked Whale or Carnosaur is better, honestly. I mean, we saw from there that flashing it in is pretty good at 6 mana. So maybe the Carnosaur isn't great, but if we can get the opponent to tap out, then resolving Carnosaur is potentially just game-winning anyway. I don't know, it's tough. I'm not sure which is better. And then I think we can trim some Metamorphs. You know, we are going second here, so it costs 3 mana, but I also, you know, especially if I'm going first against control, I like cutting down to 2 Metamorphs. Although, again, the risk there is if you do draw a bunch of clone effects, you might not have enough to close the game out. But I think you can definitely afford to go down to 6 clone effects post-sideboard, especially if you're going first and the Metamorph is 4 mana. If it's a matchup where you don't really want to be tapping out, right? If you are against control or you're up against another Discover deck where you really don't want to be tapping out on turn 3 because then the opponent can either just combo off or resolve a Teferi or something, you typically don't really want to use the clones. Although having said that, Surgical Metamorph is good in this matchup because it can copy Teferi. If you can, you know, force the opponent to tap out, resolve the Metamorph, copy their Teferi, then you can use your copy of Teferi to tuck theirs. So this hand, I think I'm happy to keep. I mean, I'm still honestly not 100% sure whether Hornlocked Whale is better than Carnosaur in this matchup. It could just be that Carnosaur is just the better card because, you know, you can use it to pick off Planeswalkers. And again, if you can get the board, the situation to a point where the opponent is tapped out, it can just win you the game. But we saw from last game that just flashing in Hornlocked Whale for 6 mana is very tricky for them to deal with and often does give you a window to go off with Quintorius. So I'm going to try it like this, but I think it's pretty close. And depending on their build, you know, if they are running a build with stuff like Snapcaster Mage, or I've seen a few builds with Oracle of the Alpha or something, then I think there's definitely an argument there for Carnosaur being better because you can take out their creatures as well, which gives you more utility. Whereas, you know, Hornlocked Whale in this matchup is basically just a 6 mana flash creature, which is still pretty effective, but, you know, if they do flash in an early Snapcaster, doesn't really do all that much there. So the opponent does have Demolition Field here, so I was tempted to just run out the Mirrex, but with Demolition Field, I mean, it's close, I think, because maybe that's a misplay. Maybe I'm supposed to play the Mirrex here, because if they do have something like a Memory Deluge, it kind of puts them in an awkward spot, right, where they kind of have to use the Demolition Field immediately, which cuts them off mana for Memory Deluge, so I think that was maybe a misplay. I'm not sure though. Okay, they cast Empress, so I think I'm forced to Mirror Shell Crab to counter that. If they do have Teferi, we have the Leyline Binding. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure that was a misplay. My logic for playing the Blood Crypt was that they might use the Demolition Field to try and cut us off a particular colour of mana. But I think if the opponent's playing well, they might just wait for the Mirrex. I'm not sure. So again, maybe it's best to run out the Mirrex here, because if they have Deluge, then it incentivizes them to use the Demolition Field. But I really want the Mirrex to survive if possible. And I'm thinking if they don't have a Deluge to use here, they might want to just be efficient with their mana and target one of my lands. Maybe, I don't know. That was possibly a misplay though. If they do have another thing to cast here. Okay, they have another Empress, so I don't think it really makes a difference this turn cycle. But yeah, I think I'm maybe supposed to just go for Mirrex there, because if they did happen to have a Memory Deluge, then they might be incentivized to use the Demolition Field instead, which means they don't then cast the Deluge, if that makes sense. But it's close. I think a lot of it comes down to whether the opponent thinks they can cut us off mana or not, right? I think... Oh, they did maybe see the basic mountain last game, but I don't know if they would remember that. We'll have to see. But either way, I'm going to run out the Mirrex here. Put the Kruger into hand last turn, obviously, because we didn't have anything to do outside of the Leyline Binding, so we didn't need to keep that extra mana up. And now the nice thing is that we have Leyline Binding already in play, so if we do get to resolve the Kruger, we can then start drawing cards off it. So yeah, the opponent does use the Demolition Field now, so I'm going to cycle the Oliphant to get a land, and then we still have enough mana here to flash in the Hornlocked Whale during the end of the opponent's turn. So they do take out the Mirrex, and we get the basic mountain. Unfortunately, that's the only basic that we've got in the deck, so if the opponent does have more, you know, Fields of Ruins or Demolition Fields or whatnot, then they can start just taking out our lands, but, you know, there's also a good chance that the opponent might just want to hold their Demolition Field. They did play very patiently with that first one, so they probably, you know, there's a good chance they might want to save that for future copies of Mirrex, especially, you know, as the game goes on and we have access to a lot of mana, just trying to, you know, Stone Rain your lands becomes a less effective strategy anyway. So they are running Kaleem, which is interesting to note. That is kind of scary because we don't really have a great way to deal with Kaleem. I guess we have the Hornlocked Whale actually, which isn't bad. But we're going to be flashing that in now anyway. So the awkward spot here is even if they have a counter spell, I still don't know if it's safe to go for Quintorius, because They could very well have, you know, Archmage's Charm into change the equation or something like that. Oh, wow. Jwari, that kind of sucks because, you know, Jwari, I mean, it's good to know that they're playing that for information-wise, but that was a very good exchange for them. I think I'm just going to try Karuga first, right? If it resolves, we get to draw a card and get a big body in play. If it doesn't resolve, then that's one counterspell that is not being used on Quintorius. So I think at this spot one, the opponent doesn't have any ways to produce a ton of card advantage. It's probably worth just jamming Quintorius each turn over the next couple turns, force them to have 2 counterspells, because they only have 3 cards in hand right now. There is obviously a chance that they could be 3 counterspells, but I think the longer the game goes on, we don't really have anything else to do with our mana. We could obviously try and cast Oliphant, but that doesn't really win us the game at all. So I think I'm going to cycle the Oliphant to just ensure that we have enough mana to potentially go Quintorius and hold open Mirror Shell Crab in case we draw that. Okay, another Hornlock Whale, so maybe now we're supposed to... The other thing about getting another land off Oliphant that I didn't mention is that they could... I think they're likely to be bringing in Mystical Dispute if they want to bring in more counters, so I want to be able to play around that a little bit better as well. And I'm going to go for Quintorius here, even though we do have the Hornlocked Whale. Okay, they did have the Dovin's Veto, but we can still hold open the instant speed side of Hornlocked Whale here, which is pretty big. Oh, I should have manually tapped, actually, because the opponent could have used their Demolition Field to take out our only blue source here. Thankfully, they didn't do it, but yeah, I should have manually tapped to keep open the Seachrome Coast as well, I think. But yeah, either way, we now get to actually use the Lagoon Breach side of Hornlocked Whale, which typically you wouldn't normally get to use. And then we can hopefully flash that in during the end of the opponent's next turn. Although having said that, I think it might just be better to go for Quintorius again here, right? Force them to have another counterspell. You know, if they play another land out here, they need to have another counterspell in their 2 cards in hand, or we just win on the spot. Whereas Hornlocked Whale versus Yorion, they've already got us on a 2-turn clock, so I think we have to just go for the Quintorius here and hope they don't have a counterspell. But I mean, we have burnt through 2 of their counterspells over the past 2 turns anyway, so I think there's a chance they might not have it. Oh, okay, they do. That's a little bit rough. And then I'll play out a Triumph, we can cycle a Triumph at the very least. And now we have 2 more draw steps to find Quintorius. And this is kind of a spot where I like having Carnosaur over Hornlock Whale, because that's another draw that we can just get off the top here in these low resource kind of scenarios. But having said that, Hornlocked Whale has been effective at basing out counterspells previously here. So I think it's close. I think I need to play the matchup a little bit more to figure out which is the better card here. Oh, wow. Okay. Found the Quintorius off the top, so again, they need to have their last card in hand being a counterspell, and we still have the Kaleem as a backup in case they don't have a counterspell here. Sorry, in case they do have a counterspell, I mean. It resolves, they could still have Get Lost though, so... Okay, we do hit a Metamorph, which obviously isn't ideal. We'd rather hit Spark Double here, but we've definitely still got enough clones left in the deck to be able to win here, I think. And it doesn't look like they have a piece of interaction. Okay, sweet, so we get to combo off here, which is huge. And I'm pretty sure we have enough clones left in the deck to win. So that was obviously a pretty clutch top deck. But this is the whole reason we play the deck, right? To enable this 1-card combo so that, you know, we can just draw it off the top and win out of nowhere. Yeah, opponent just scoops up. So yeah, we got there. Nice. Okay, so we're going first here. And I think I can keep this right. We've got Kaleem and Hornlock Whale as early interaction, which, you know, against a Lurus deck, I'm not 100% sure where we're up against here. I think I've seen this person on Auras a few times, and so Kaleem and Hornlock Whale are good at buying us time, and then Metamorph can potentially ramp us into a turn 5 Carnosaur if we draw that off the top. So this hand definitely does need some help off the top, but we have a lot of good draws here, so I think I'm happy to keep this one, especially on the play. So opponent in the tank about a mulligan decision. But yeah, these sorts of hands where you do have a decent amount of lands, it might be tempting to try and cycle the Rafine's Tower, but you need to hit your 5th and your 6th sometimes land drop on curve. So I think I'm definitely going to play the Rafine's Tower out on turn 1 here, especially because it's our only source of white mana outside of the Mirexes as well. So I'm going to lead on the Rafine's Tower. Even if we draw more lands, we still have Karuga as kind of a decent mana sink as well. So... Okay, so Hallowed Fountain, so I assume we are against Auras here if I had to guess. Gonna play the Blood Crypt Shocked here so that we can cycle the Kaleem. Oh no, okay. Invisible Stalker is not a good sign. I think our only way to win here really is to just try and draw one of our one-turn combos and go off on turn 5. And I mean, we do at least have Surgical Metamorph here, so that if we do draw a Carnosaur, we can go off on turn 5 with that as well. I think here, just to try and preserve a bit of life, I'm just going to put Karuga into hand and, not play a Shockland, because damage is very relevant in this matchup, right? And dealing yourself 2 damage unnecessarily can be the difference between winning and potentially buying yourself another turn, essentially. Yikes. Okay, that's not a good sign. So I think we have to draw... I think we have to go Surgical Metamorph here to copy a land, just in case we draw a Carnosaur off the top here. Right, I think that's one of our 2 outs. And I'm going to copy the Blood Crypt just so we have double red without needing to play a Shockland. I guess Mirex could produce mana of any colour, but that at least unlocks Carnosaur as a good top deck at this point. But yeah, Invisible Stalker was rough. If they hadn't had Stalker, I think our hand is pretty reasonable here. We have the Hornlocked Whale to be able to, put back one of their creatures. But without Doomscar in the main deck, I don't think we really have any way to beat this. We need to just draw Quintorius or Carnosaur off the top to survive, or to win here, basically. Yikes. Okay, that doesn't do it. Maybe my out here is hoping that my opponent forgets that Invisible Stalker can't be blocked, maybe. So I'll use Metamorph to copy the core Spirit Dancer and tap down the Spirit Dancer with the Kaleem, but, that's pretty unlikely. We're almost certainly dead here, but, we'll make them play it out. And I guess we also might get a bit more information if they're running, particular auras that are unusual as well. Could be useful going into the next game. But yeah, post-sideboard, this should become better, right? We get to bring in Doomscar as an out to the Invisible Stalker. But I feel like we already have pretty good tools for all the rest of their creatures. And obviously post-sideboard, we do get access to Doomscar to kill the Stalker. So yeah, I feel like post-sideboard should definitely improve slightly. So not seen anything too out of the ordinary here. I haven't seen Mana Confluence yet, so I'm not 100% sure if they're running off-color auras like, Audacity or Hammer Hands that I've seen in a few lists, but I don't think that really changes how we sideboard or approach the matchup, to be honest. So, but yeah, Stalker is definitely the scariest card from our side, but we're definitely going to be bringing in the Doomscars, which can answer it. And then outside of that, I'm not really sure there's anything else we want to bring in here. I think in terms of cuts, Shark Typhoon, is not that great. I think we just want to maximize interaction here. I think Carnosaur isn't particularly good here. It's obviously fine as, it's obviously great game 1 as a combo piece, but when we're bringing in Doomscar, it becomes less consistent as a combo piece. And also the 3 damage mode isn't super relevant, right? We are on the play, so there's a chance that we can use that to take out one of their 2-drops if they run it out on turn 2. But I think all of the other cards are... All of the other pieces of interaction, rather, are more important. I think Hornlock Well is great. I think Kaleem is great. Doomscar is very important to be able to deal with Stalker. So I think it should be good. I think, Stalker is definitely the card that is best against us. Okay, can't keep that, unfortunately. This hand looks pretty nice, though. We get to put a Spark Double back in the deck for the Quintorius. We have both Doomscar and Leyline Binding here. And, even though we have to use Merrick's, we do still have double white for the Doomscar here, which is, important. So, obviously don't have enough cost reduction on the Leyline Binding to cast it this turn, so I'm definitely just going to foretell the Doomscar here. And now the opponent's in kind of a tough spot where they're kind of incentivized not to play a creature here because they know that we've got something foretold, and it's pretty obvious, I think, what we've got here, right? There's no other foretell card that would be played in this sort of deck. It's definitely not going to be a Sauric coming or whatever when we're running the Quintorius combo. I guess they didn't see the combo last game, but I think they can make an educated guess about what we're playing here. So I think we're going to shock in the Steam Vents here to hold up Leyline Binding and then cycle the Oliphant. Okay, they choose not to play creatures. They probably got a read that we have a Doomscar here. And then... I'm just debating. I think I'm just going to take the Sacred Foundry here. We could obviously get a basic mountain to reduce the amount of damage that we take off our lands. We can also So I'm just thinking about what I want to do. We can also get an off-color land to reduce the cost of Leyline Binding, but with Doomscar, I think it makes sense to get another Sacred Foundry here. Just debating what I want to do here. We could obviously Doomscar, but that seems like a waste, especially if they follow up with a Stalker. I think I'm just going to play the Sacred Foundry tapped here just to reduce the amount of damage we take, and then go for Binding. And then as long as we can survive this turn and they don't have a Spell Pierce or Mana Tithe or something, we can just jam the Quintorius next turn. So I feel pretty good about this spot. I mean, the only thing I'm really scared about here is a Spell Pierce or something, but we can usually get a pretty good read about whether they have that or not. Okay, they do have Confluence, which is interesting. They have Light Pause, which is scary, so I think I'm going to Binding here before they can give Protect. Actually, no, wait, that was a misplay. That was a pretty big misplay. I mean, I don't think they can deal 14 here with any sequence of auras, but I definitely should have waited because... yeah, if they use white auras, we can then use Leyline Binding on Light Pause, and then when Giver of Runes gives protection from white on the Light Pause, it makes the white auras fall off. So that was definitely a misplay. I should have played that a little bit slower. I should have let the Light Pause resolve, wait until they've put all the auras on, and then go for the Leyline Binding, because then they have to give, if they want to protect the Light Pause, they have to give protection from white. Oh wait, no, this isn't lethal, right? They do have haste auras available. Okay, that's only 12 damage. Okay, that was almost a very big punt on my part, right? If we had just Shocklands, we wouldn't have been able to win that. So I definitely should have waited for them to put the auras on first and then gone for the Leyline Binding there. That was definitely my bad, but thankfully we had the untapped land in hand already, and you know, we haven't drawn any clones here, so we should definitely have enough to win the game. But yeah, I almost punted that one. Well, I did punt, but I almost lost the match because of it there. So yeah, that's definitely something to bear in mind going forwards. Always remember that if Giver of Runes gives protection from a creature, if it has white auras, if it has white auras on it, those auras fall off, which would mean, you know, in this situation, had they gone for the same line, both Ethereal Armors and the Sentinel's Eyes would have fallen off, which massively reduces the damage we take. And all we're doing here is trying to buy time, you know, to be able to go off with the combo. So that, yeah, definitely a mistake on my part there. But we still managed to get there this game, thankfully. Now the opponent definitely knows what we're on though, and, you know, I have to assume they probably have Spell Pierce in their sideboard, or they don't really have good ways to deal with stuff like Divine Purge from control. Not sure we want to change how we sideboarded there, to be honest. I think I like the sideboard plan here, yeah. But just got to hope that they don't have Stalker when we don't have Doomscar, basically. I feel like we have good tools to shut off most of their other creatures. I think Hornlock Whale is really good against them. I think Kaleem is reasonably good against them as well. Leyline Binding is great. And then Doomscar can be good as well. I mean, the shift from... cards like Selfless Savior towards Giver of Runes makes sweepers better here, I think. But again, I have to assume they're going to be bringing in Spell Pierce or some counterspell against me, maybe Davin's Veto as well. So I definitely need to be wary of that going into Game 3 as well. But overall, I you know, this is the first time I've played this matchup, but I feel like we should have good tools, right? I've played this matchup from like a pure control deck quite a few times, and it, you know, feels really good. Kaleem is great. Single target removal is pretty good. Divine Purge is really good, and we obviously have a, you know, pretty similar analog in terms of Doomscar. Doomscar is actually probably better because obviously Divine Purge, they can just recast the creatures later in the game, whereas Doomscar deals with them permanently. And I feel like most of the protection spells... Actually, I'm not sure what protection spells auras typically run right now. You know, it used to be Karametra's Blessing, but I'm pretty sure, you know, they might have changed to Slip Out the Back, because I believe that keeps all the auras on, which does dodge the Doomscar. So, yeah, we'll definitely have to be wary if they pass with blue mana available, or even white mana. Some builds I've seen running Surge of Salvation as well to protect from discard spells, which doesn't work particularly well against Doomscar. But yeah, we'll just play it as it comes up, right? So on the draw here is a little bit sketchier, but we've got Doomscar, which is an out to the Invisible Stalker, and we've got double binding as well. So this is definitely a keep, I think. Even though having Spark Double is obviously a bit awkward here. I mean, Surgical Metamorph, not the best in this matchup, but if we can use it to copy Leyline Binding, that is actually pretty good. So, and obviously if we end up drawing a Quintorius, we can use it to ramp as well. So I think here, well, I'm definitely going to foretell the Doomscar. I'm going to use the Castle of Vantress just to preserve my life total slightly, but that might be a misplay, because if we drew like a Stomping Ground or a Blood Crypt off the top, then we could reduce the leyline binding even further here. So maybe I'm supposed to play the Sacred Foundry last turn. Thankfully, it didn't end up making too much of a difference, but either way, I think I'm just going to shock in the Sacred Foundry in case we need to binding. Obviously, that would give the opponent a draw off the Sentinel here, but I think it's worth having it up here just in case they do play something like a Light Pause that we want to be able to kill straight away. Interesting. So they got Pithing Needle, almost certainly going to be naming Quintorius here, and I don't think, if they don't play anything else, I think I'm going to wait on the leyline binding. I really don't want to give them cards here if I can avoid it, because it doesn't look like the opponent has a very explosive hand, or they're just playing patiently. You know, it could be either one, but I would rather be able to use binding and pay for the Sentinel trigger here, right? I'm not in a rush to kill the Pithing Needle. I'm not in a rush to kill the Sentinel. Well, it's just a 1/1, really. So I'm going to play it patiently. You know, this is the other big advantage of this particular build over the more all-in versions. You can just play this slow control deck. If they don't do anything crazy here, we can start activating Mirax. We can start using the Castle Vantress as well. We've still got Doomscar available, so... But the thing is against auras, you have to play very conservatively because, you know, they can have turns where they hold all their resources, try and bait out your removal, and then get a threat to stick. Those are definitely the scariest scenarios. Okay, they go for Staggering Insight, so I'm a bit worried about protection spells here, but... Wow, Arena's giving away priorities. They don't have anything at instant speed, so we get to take out the Sentinel, and they lose the Staggering Insight here as well, which is pretty big. That was a pretty big turn for us, I think. Interesting. So we can use the Surgical Metamorph here to copy the Leyline Binding to get rid of the Pithing Needle, but then we don't have Leyline Binding available at instant speed, and we saw from last game that they can get 14 hasty damage out of nowhere. You know, if they have something like a Light Pause here, for example. So I think it was very important to hold open the Leyline Binding here. Okay, so they go for the Ethereal Armor. We have to use the Leyline Binding now, or they can get a Kaya's Ghost Form to protect the Light Pause. Okay, no protection spell as well is very big there. And now I think I'm kind of tempted to use the Metamorph to copy the Binding to get rid of the Needle. Although maybe I'm supposed to play a little bit more patiently. Hard to say. I mean, I'm also kind of tempted to just put Karuga into hand here because it's already drawing us 2 cards, you know, when we cast it. And then it makes Spark double good as well because then we can potentially copy the Karuga here. And, I'm kind of, you know, I don't really want to tap out of Metamorph. I want to represent interaction here. So I'm going to set a stop during the opponent's turn so we still represent some sort of interaction here. Because if we don't want to just give away that we don't have anything. Okay, so they put the Aura on the Lurrus here. So now I'm kind of glad that I didn't just use the Surgical to get rid of the Pithing Needle. Okay, they got Ghost Form. So now that's kind of tricky. Oh, okay, Metamorph is a great draw here. So if we used the... just use the Leyline Binding to take out the Lurrus. They obviously just get the Lurrus back because of the Ghost Form. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy the Leyline Binding and exile the Ghost Form so it's not in the graveyard for them in case they like unearth the Lurrus later or something or get it back somehow. And then use the Metamorph to now exile the Lurrus. So I think, you know, from how they've played, they probably don't have another creature. Oh, okay, spoke too soon. Okay, yikes. They got all the glitters on Light Pause, so... That's kind of sketchy. I mean, we do have both Doomscott and Hornlocked Whale. Okay. Carnosaur is also a decent draw here. So now we can Doomscar, which will trigger the Kaya's Ghost Form, getting them back the Light Pause again, and then we can just immediately kill it with the Carnosaur. I think I'm probably going to wait on... I don't know. They could draw a protection spell, which is what I'm kind of worried about. But if they draw an Aura off the top, we can kind of, you know, make them waste it, right? Because presumably they just cast it. Okay, they drew a Sentinel, so... I mean, either way, I'm definitely going to take out the Light Pause here. And now I feel pretty good, right? The opponent's completely at the mercy of the top of their deck now. They're not going to be, you know, they don't have Light Pause in play anymore, so they're not going to get, you know, tons of card advantage off the auras that they get. Now we get to draw 4 off the Karuga here, which is huge. We still have the Hornlocked Whale available. Okay, we have the Carnosaur and the Kaleem to deal with the Sentinels, so I feel pretty good about this spot now. I'd be pretty surprised if we ended up losing this one. Okay, they just play a land out, so I'm going to use the Carnosaur here to take out the Sentinel. just so they don't have any creatures in play. All their auras are going to be dead draws from here. And now we can use the Spark Double to... Well, I'm going to use the Oliphant first just to reduce the number of lands in our deck, make sure that we keep hitting the land drop every single turn. And now we can use the Spark Double to copy the Karuga, which not only enters play as a 6/5 non-legendary copy of it, but it also draws us 5 cards here, so... Okay, we found Quintorius, and now we can use the Metamorph to, make a copy of Leyline Binding to get rid of the Pithing Needle, and now Quintorius is live again for next turn. And we don't have to worry about any hasty, attacks, because even if they draw Light Paws, they need Light Paws plus an Aura to be able to get in for damage here. So now I'm just going to cast the Quintorius, and we have gone through quite a few clones, so I'm not sure if we can deal 15 damage, but we already have 11 power in play. Yeah, we got there, nice.